The time is now 5:30 and a quorum is present. So I will call this meeting of the Madison Plan Commission of October 24th to order. First, we'll get some information from our technical facilitator. Jesse?
All right, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which the hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First is public comment, and I don't believe we have any public comment. Is that correct, Heather?
It looks like we do have one registrant,
Oh,
Bob
okay.
of East Gorham Street.
Okay. Yes, I do see that. Okay. So under agenda item 1, Bob Kleba, East Gorham Street, Madison, opposed and wishing to speak, representing the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation. Bob, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, commissioners and staff, for your time tonight. I'm sorry to jump the queue, but I'm hosting a meeting at 7 o'clock tonight. I will stay in this meeting until I have to leave in case you need to pose any further questions. I am testifying about, I believe, items 3, 4, 5, 6, the North Butler Street proposal. The Madison Trust for Historic Preservation opposes the rezoning of 3.5 lots from DR1 zoning to DR2. The DR zoning districts were created to recognize the diverse 19th century and 20th century architecture that we have in neighborhoods in the downtown area. The zoning code and the downtown plan promote the preservation of the vernacular architecture in neighborhoods like James Madison Park. Without the integrity of the collection of these buildings, we lose the context of the neighboring Mansion Hill, Langdon Street, Fourth Lake Ridge, and East Dayton historic districts, as well as landmarks like the Lamp House, Das Kronenberg, the Collins Houses, and others. Most of the recommendations in the downtown plan for James Madison Park go against this zoning change and against such a large development. While recommendation 104 cites allowing higher density development on North Butler Street, this recommendation needs to be kept in the perspective of a key part of objective 4.11. That is, the renovation of existing houses coupled with selective redevelopment that generally reflects the scale and rhythm of the existing structures should help reinvigorate the area. The rezone proposal allowing the scale of this proposal is in direct opposition to this objective. Remember that the downtown plan promotes the redevelopment of individual lots in James Madison Park for 3 or 4 unit buildings, not the combination of almost 4 city lots to build a 115-foot wide, 32 unit building. The James Madison Park neighborhood is under extreme development pressure. Maintaining the DR1 zoning will allow needed infill development while preserving the architectural value, eclectic makeup, and general vibrancy of this important downtown area. The trust encourages the commission to deny this request for a zoning change. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners of Bob Kleba? I don't see any raised hands. Thank you, Bob. Okay, moving on then, communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Seeing none, Moving on to minutes of October 3rd. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? There are no raised hands. Is there a motion to approve? Commissioner Solheim moved. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. Next is schedule of upcoming meetings. We have a regular meeting on November 7th, 21st, and December 12th. December already, my goodness. Okay, and a special meeting on Thursday, December 8th, which will be at 5 o'clock rather than our normal 5:30. And we'll get back to you with information on location. Next, we will move to our consent agenda. I will read the items on our consent agenda. Agenda item 7. Agenda item 8 is for referral to November 21st at the request of the applicant. Agenda item 9 and 10 referred to December 12th, pending a recommendation by the Urban Design Commission. Agenda item 11, agenda item 12 for referral to November 7th, and agenda item 13. Do any commissioners want to request that an item be separated and taken off of the consent agenda? I don't see that anybody does, so then I will read all of these into the record. So agenda item 7, Legistar 73359, located at 2403 East Springs Drive, 7th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use for a planned multi-use site with 40,000 square feet or more of floor area, of which 25,000 square feet or more is designated as retail, a hotel or motel. Consideration of a conditional use for a reduction as allowed by ordinances, which requires a lodging development with between 50,000 and 200,000 square feet of floor area to have 2 loading spaces of at least 10 foot by 50 feet located outside of an aisle and maneuvering spaces to allow construction of a 5-story, 219-room hotel. And again, agenda item 8, Legistar 73360 is for referral to November 21st. Agenda item 9, Legistar 73382, and agenda item 10, Legistar 73801, both for referral to December 12th. Agenda item 11, Legistar 73816, located at 626 Shui Road, 9th Alder District. Consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence. Agenda item 12, Legistar 73817, is for referral to November 7th. And agenda item 13, Legistar 73804, approving the final plat of University Research Park Pioneer First Edition replat on land generally addressed as 602 through 1202 Boyer Street, 601 to 1103 Boyer Street, and 8825 Nelson Crossing, First Alder District. I will open the public hearing on these items. I'll close the public hearing since there are no registrants. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? moved by Commissioner Solheim. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Mendez. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. The consent agenda is passed unanimously. Okay, then moving to agenda item 2, Legistar 74067, the Shady Wood Neighborhood Development Plan Update. And I believe Kirsty Latch of our staff will be giving us an overview. Kirsty?
Yes, thank you, Chair Zellers. I will share my screen here. Okay. Are you all seeing the full screen and not the notes? Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, so good evening, Plan Commissioners. My name is Kirsty Lodge. My pronouns are they, them, and I work in the city's planning division, joined by my colleague, Jeff Greger. We're here tonight to provide an update on the Shady Wood Neighborhood Development Plan. So the last time we visited the Plan Commission was in February when we were seeking authorization to start working on the plan. We've since held a public meeting in March, the initial meeting, and then another one last month, which coincided with releasing the draft plan. So we're here tonight to update you all and get some guidance on a few topics in the draft plan. But to start here, I'm going to provide a little bit of background information. I'll go over highlights of the draft plan, talk a little bit about some of the feedback we heard, cover the project timeline, and then we'll get into those questions and discussion. So starting with the background here, as you're probably aware, the city prepared a draft Shady Wood Neighborhood Development Plan back in 2009. However, that process resulted in only a small portion of that plan being adopted, which is the 40-acre phase 1 area up here at the corner of Midtown and Woods Road, which is since mostly developed. The planning area now is about 425 acres. It's got Midtown Road on the northern boundary and Woods Road on the east. The area is split between the Madison Metropolitan School District and the Verona Area School District, and the Ice Age Trail is planned to run through this area. And really a main purpose of working on this plan is to pursue the Ice Age Trail, Ice Age National Scenic Trail through the area. So you can see on this map that the light green colors shows the official trail corridor as it was designated by Congress in 1980. That same wide corridor was adopted by the DNR in 87, and Dane County adopted it in 1990 as well. So one of the purposes of this NDP is to further refine that corridor and determine where those boundaries should be. And we've been making some progress at preserving this land since 2009. So the city bought this parcel that's now Moraine Woods Conservation Park. We partnered with the city of Verona and Dane County to buy the property to the south. Vitzer family generously donated that property, and the Ice Age Trail Alliance owns this property in the northwest part of the study area. Quickly here, just covering a little bit of environmental features. The elevation varies greatly in this area. The most recent glacial advance created this amazing topography, and that's really, one of the main reasons that we're preserving the corridor. So you can see the terminal moraine in the darker red as it slopes down towards Lower Badger Mill Creek. There's some kettle ponds in the area as well as some pretty steep slopes. For this process, we looked at the recent watershed study that was done in the area, and that showed that the anticipated flooding that would result from a 100-year storm, given the existing conditions. So, it really shows that a pretty large portion of the planning area would flood and has some flooding issues. So that's something that, we've made sure that we've incorporated into the plan and are setting aside land for stormwater management. So jumping into the draft plan, cover some of the highlights. Yeah, but overall, it covers the standard NDP topics. So land use and housing types, transportation, parks, stormwater management, utilities and services. And then in addition, we also have a section regarding sustainability. So we put together this draft land use and street layout concept, which we think does a good job at balancing the desire to preserve an open space corridor for the Ice Age Trail with the need to create more housing to meet Madison's growing housing needs and our housing need projections. But as you can see, a majority of the planning area is about 63% is recommended for open space. That's the green color. And that includes the Ice Age Trail corridor and stormwater management areas. The Ice Age Trail corridor, as we are recommending, is outlined in this sort of brownish color, following my cursor there. And then we've got the conceptual Ice Age Trail and this dotted dark green as it meets the existing trail here in University Ridge Golf Course. And a trailhead here within the corridor. And I want to mention that the actual alignment for the path and the location of the trailhead are just conceptual at this point. They may not be in these exact locations when it's built. Yeah, then overall we've got quite a large area for stormwater around the floodplain, as I pointed out, as well as stormwater management that's dispersed throughout the developable area. We're also showing some dual use stormwater management and sports fields. So the primary use for these two fields here would actually be stormwater management, but we hope they can also be used as sports fields to make use of, the very limited land that's really available in this area. And then overall, I guess the main recommendations is that we're related to housing. We're recommending a limited amount of housing mix 1 in this western portion of the planning area. And we've sort of, chose this western portion of the planning area for housing mix 1 because the Ice Age Trail corridor is quite narrow in this area, and there's no vegetative cover. It's not a wooded area. So we think that housing mix 1 would be a little bit more appropriate there, and it's closer to the the far edge of the city. But the majority of the developable areas recommended for housing mix 2. That's that sort of medium yellow color, and I'll get into a little more detail about the different housing mixes in the next slides. And then in order to support existing transit service and increase the number of residents that have access to this great amenity, the Ice Age Trail, we're recommending housing mix 3 in 2 key locations. So one along around Woods Road here, which is a collector, as well as adjacent to the open space and sports fields. We think that these locations make sense in terms of, being close to the open space as well as next to the collector. And it also minimizes the impact on the Ice Age Trail at these locations. So jumping into a little more detail about the housing mixes. So in the memo, it notes that we're recommending slight increases to the density for housing mix 1 and 2. We're recommending the same changes as were recommended in the Reiner NDP, which was before you somewhat recently. So the housing mix 1 density was previously up to 8 dwelling units per acre. We're recommending that would change to be 6 to 12 dwelling units per acre. And housing mix 1 would likely include, single family homes, probably on our typical size city lots. And then housing mix 2 was previously between 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre. And we're recommending that would be increased slightly to 12 to 20 dwelling units per acre. And overall, the These two housing mixes are pretty similar. It's slightly more dense in housing mix 2, but the building forms are very similar. We would expect single family homes, maybe duplexes, and hopefully some attached townhomes as well in housing mix 2. And then for housing mix 3, we're not actually recommending any changes to the density there. It would remain 20 to 40 dwelling units per acre. That's as we're recommending. For building heights would be between 2 and 4 stories. But I wanted to mention that we do include a note that for housing mix 3 on the Drager property, I'm just going to jump back there, which is adjacent to the sports fields. We are recommending a maximum of 3 stories in that area to minimize the visual impact on the Ice Age Trail there. And yeah, as you're probably aware, we can expect to see duplexes, 4 units, attached townhomes, and even some relatively small multifamily buildings in housing mix 3 areas. So this 2D sketch gives a general idea of how the plan could potentially be implemented in the future, how buildings could be arranged and parking could be situated. And as you can see, the majority of the area is that housing mix 2, single family lots. Then we have townhomes that generally transition to the apartment buildings along both sort of sides where the housing mix 3 is recommended. And then I guess, one of the questions in the memo is if you agree with the locations for housing mix 3. And, in an ideal world, we would have been able to recommend maybe a little bit higher density at this corner of Midtown and Woods Road, but the plan in 2009 was adopted and approved, and so that area's since developed. We still think that along Woods Road and adjacent to the open space does make sense, particularly because there's transit service along Woods Road that runs to Epic and currently to the West Transfer Point, although the transfer point will be moving locations a bit so that, but the transit service will remain on Woods Road. So a little bit there about some of the housing mixes and locations. Then we also show the conceptual trail locations that come through the neighborhood and then come down into the open space corridor. Regarding draft transportation recommendations. I wanted to mention that this pedestrian and bicycle map has been updated based on recent feedback from transportation staff. So it's been updated since the draft plan was released, and we're still ironing out some of those details as Complete Green Streets kind of makes its way through the adoption process. So we're no longer showing cross sections at this point, but we think that the community connector street typology that we have referenced in the draft plan from Complete Green Streets makes sense. And then I'll just kind of walk through quickly some of the recommendations in terms of pedestrian and bike facilities. So there's an existing on-street, there are existing on-street bike facilities here on McKee, as well as a shared use path that runs down to Northern Lights Road. This area here, the former Marty Farm that was recently approved for development, will have a path that runs up and connects to Shady Oak Lane. And when we visited the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, they recommended that we propose a connection from this Shady Oak path that runs toward the open space and to the neighborhood. So our sort of, best area that could happen due to, slopes and difficult terrain would be to recommend that along the creek here. And that could be built as part of Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District's interceptor project that's planned for 2025-ish. So we're recommending that path through there. It's a somewhat newer revision. And then that path connects down to a shared use path off street that rings sort of rings along the south side of the developable area and connects to Woods Road. Also connects north and meets a proposed future shared use path that runs through the Greenway and runs further north. We would recommend a pedestrian crossing here at Midtown Road for safer crossing. And then the shared use path along the south side of Midtown Road, which could connect to existing on-street facilities that would continue east, or you could jump down to the shared use facility that runs all the way down to McKee. I also wanted to mention that we're not recommending sidewalks on this east side here because of the golf course. We don't expect residential uses there, but we do have that shared use path on the west side. And let's see, what else did I want to mention? Oh yeah, the shared use paths that connect into the open space, they would turn to pedestrian only paths as they meet and go into the open space. We don't want bikes in the open space corridor. Then we show a conceptual loop that goes down to the terminal moraine and has really great views of the area. So moving on to draft phasing and utilities. So as I mentioned, the MMSD Sewerage District is working on that Plan Interceptor project in the near future, which will run through, so it's that red line here. And that will relieve the existing lift station here to provide gravity flow for the area. And overall, the phasing and utilities here are really pretty simple. We essentially just really have phase B because phase A is for the most part already developed. And in talking with other agencies, we've learned that both water and sewer could serve really any of these properties in phase B. Just about any property in phase B could develop first. There doesn't really need to be a particular development sequence. So we've kept the phasing quite simple. Really quickly running through a summary of the public feedback. I'll just give a quick summary. You've got the full summary in your materials. But at our public meetings, we heard pretty strong support for the Ice Age Trail corridor. That was especially clear at our last meeting that we held near the end of September. Overall, we heard support for a future study of the speed limit on Woods Road, as well as a bit of concern about increased traffic and potential impacts on safety, particularly for bicyclists and pedestrians on Woods Road. We also heard some concerns about stormwater, particularly in phase 1, which we feel have been addressed by the recommendations in the draft. We also got some questions about boundary agreements. And after the most recent public meeting, we did receive a couple emails that mentioned concern about adding multifamily in the area. Those written comments should be in your materials in your packet. As well as one suggestion to add commercial uses within walking distance. So looking at the project timeline, after tonight, we'll make revisions and complete the full draft plan text and the maps with a goal to introduce at the November 22nd council meeting. Then we will visit the Transportation Planning and Policy Board and Board of Parks. Board of Park Commissioners, that is, to review the plan. We'll come back to Plan Commission again. And we anticipate review and potential adoption by council in early 23. We hope that'll happen, but changes to schedules do sometimes occur. So yeah, that's all that I have in terms of a presentation. We could next move on to the questions and discussion, but yeah, I think I'll turn it back to the chair to see if there are questions.
First, I'd like to find out from commissioners if you have any questions about the presentation or about the draft plan. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. So Kirsty, I'm curious, if we could go back to the very first exhibit that shows the proposed land use. To the south of the, yes, to the,
Sorry
that
about
one,
that.
that one's good. I'm trying to understand property lines here, but I see 4 existing houses. Is that, am I correct on that? And I see that their property runs well into the corridor that is earmarked for the Ice Age Trail. What's the status of that? Is the thought that our Parks Division is going to acquire that as parkland? What is the status of that land becoming parkland versus part of a private property?
Yeah, that's a great
In fact, it looks like the proposal is that those houses will go away altogether.
I'm gonna jump actually to, if I can get this to move here. There we go. So this map includes a map note relating to these 4 properties, which is probably a little bit difficult to see on the slide here. But it says the 4 properties with existing dwelling units south of the open space conservation corridor, so these 4 properties, should not be included in CARPC's environmental corridor map. And changes to existing land use on these properties is not expected. So essentially what we've done here, and it was kind of a tricky thing to address, but the red dots really acknowledge that those existing housing units are there. We're not trying to show any changes on those properties other than to preserve the northern portions of those properties for the trail. And then we would not expect any changes here. We're just denoting it with the open space corridor because we don't expect any changes there, and include that map note to make that clear.
I think that's fairly clear, but would there be an easement for the trail, or is there some mechanism by which that trail corridor can be preserved? I mean, as I see it right now, it actually traverses at least one of those properties.
Yes, that is true. The trail does go through the northern part of this property. So in an ideal world, we would, not necessarily the city, potentially Dane County or other partners could purchase this land, or other sorts of like easements to the land. But we would expect that to only run up to this line, which is the boundary of the open space corridor. Does that make sense?
It does, although you're still designating even those houses as stormwater and other open space. Is that appropriate for our residents?
I think Jeff Greger has his hand raised as well, and maybe would like to also address this question.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we gave those the other open space color it's kind of our catch-all. Again, the map note indicates we don't anticipate any additional changes to those properties. So I mean, we could have left them blank, or that portion of the property blank, but we wanted to give some sense of what would be expected on those properties in the future. So our best category for that is kind of our catch-all other open space. It will allow those property owners to continue on as they are today. And as far as, reaching an agreement to get the trail corridor through there, I think, this plan is leaving that somewhat open-ended. It could be easement, it could be purchase, it could be donation. We really don't want to specify that the city's going to come through and buy it all. I don't think we can necessarily afford that. So, if we're not able to secure some of those properties, we have I think, enough wiggle room in there that we could, reroute the trail slightly to the north, to get these other properties connected. So we're trying to leave all possibilities open on the table.
Thank you, Jeff. Did you have any follow-ups, Commissioner Fernandez?
No, I don't. Thank you. That was helpful.
Okay, thank you. Alder Heck.
Thank you. And thank you, Kirsty, for the good presentation. I guess a follow-up question to what Commissioner Fernandez was asking about. I'm having flashbacks to Oscar Mayer Special Area Plan, sorry. And I'm wondering about the current zoning on those properties, and could there be a disconnect between what those property owners might want to do and calling it open space conservation corridor, which I realize is not zoning, but could what if one of those property owners decides to do something entirely different on that land? That would be their right, even though this plan has a land use recommendation of open space conservation. If that makes sense, I'm just kind of wondering what could there be some future disconnects that are beyond what the current disconnects are?
Kirsty, do you want to take that one, or?
Sure, I can make an attempt for sure. Just looking at the existing zoning map, I've got that up on one of my other screens. The properties with those 4 units, existing housing units, are zoned RR2 under town zoning or county zoning. I think that's rural residential zoning, low density. So, I don't know all the details of how the Oscar Mayer open space issue sort of sorted out or how that worked. But, overall, I think that because these properties are within the planning area, we needed to show something on those properties, some sort of recommendation. I think our concern was that showing housing mix 1 there might give the impression that we're expecting a change to that land use and that they could be developed in the future, but that's not really what we anticipate. So I'm not sure if I exactly addressed your point or your question.
It looks like Jeff has some further comments. Jeff?
Yeah, likely those 4 properties would stay in the township anyhow. I don't know that City of Madison wants to have those brought into the city and serve them with services. So whatever they're zoned in the town, any changes to their property would go through the town and county process. And that may be another bargaining chip that the city may have with those property owners. They may desire to stay in the town, but for that, not needing to annex to the city, then they may give a easement or something like that. But I wouldn't anticipate those properties coming into the city, specifically those 4, just because they're going to be harder for us to serve.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Did you have a follow-up, Alder?
I actually have a couple more questions, if I may. But that did answer that question. I recognize that it's a little bit undecided, but there is designating those as something is better than nothing. So thank you. And then just a couple of other quick questions. I'd be interested to know what you heard in community feedback from the already developed northeast corner, the residents up there. What you heard from them in terms of future land use recommendations for adjacent parcels, and then also I'm not really I haven't been out this way in a while, and I'm not familiar with where commercial access. I mean, what commercial entities are within walking or biking distance, and where are those?
Oh, sure. So I'll answer that first part first. What we heard from the folks that are in this existing developed area, We don't necessarily have the information on exactly where the folks that provided feedback lived. They were, in our public meetings, but we don't know necessarily where they lived. I think the 2 written comments, the emails, I believe both of those people did live within this area. I might be wrong, but I know at least one of them does live within this area. And those were the 2 folks that had some concern about adding multifamily. I think one of them also did mention some concern about speed and increased traffic on Woods Road. But I think other than that, we don't specifically know what, where these folks lived in terms of what they said at our meetings. Yeah, we just don't know. Oh
Okay.
dear, the lights just turned off on me in here. Oh, that's weird. I'm gonna have to stand up and turn them back on so I'm not in the dark. Sorry about that. And then the second question you asked, existing commercial that could be biked or walked to. I believe East Down, Midtown a ways. I would not know exactly how far it is. It wouldn't be walkable, I don't think. Is it Midtown Commons? Yes. Midtown Commons would probably be the nearest commercial.
Okay. All right, thanks. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Paulson.
Actually, I have a very related question to what Alder Heck was, which was about commercial, and it was about any of the land uses kind of nearby. If there are other plans that do have any commercial possibilities on them, kind of just north of Midtown, where there's some stuff that's not on where that hasn't been developed yet. If there's anything even on the docket, because that's a lot of. I've not been out that way in a long time either, but last time I was out there, if I remember right, it's mostly kind of houses on big lots, reasonably spread out. So things
Kurt,
may have
sorry.
filled in since I've last been out there, but
Kirsty?
Are you able to see the map that I just pulled up? No, you're not. Okay.
No.
I would have to stop sharing. Well, maybe I can find it in the later part of my presentation. I will jump down to that. Just give me one moment here. Here it is.
Well, go. I was going to say, while you're looking for that, Kirsty, the High Point Raymond plan has a community mixed use at the corner of South Pleasant View and Midtown. Right at the northeast corner there, that's planned. That's probably the closest node of mixed use / commercial that will be there in the future.
Did that answer your question, Alder Paulson?
yeah, it does, I guess. Yeah, it just feels like it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of golf courses, so it's a lot of nice places to walk by, but it is kind of a long walk to kind of get anywhere out there. Okay, thank you.
Did you have any further questions, Alder?
Well, I guess my only remaining question is also on the Ice Age Trail, just making sure that we do, in fact, if we need some wiggle room to acquire anything that if it does have to go north, that we have the flexibility to do that, to get into that higher density
Yes.
Housing stuff there. And I just want to be careful that we don't suddenly, our only chance to make the last 150 feet connection is to buy 3 big apartment buildings and tear them down, sort of just north of the second property after Woods Road there. Kind of
Yes.
in there. If we have to go north into that,
Yeah, that's a great question. So we it's very hard to see at this, I guess, at this scale, but we do have a very small corner of this property, which is carved out and is included in the open space corridor. And the property owner is aware of that small corner that's on their property. But that would be, not the ideal scenario, that we would run the trail up there and get an easement here and go through that way. But if we needed to, we do have that small
Okay.
corner for that purpose. So we would just need to get it onto the Drager property here, and then this property is already preserved for open space.
Great, thank you. Don't want to miss out on the little smidgen that we need, and
Absolutely.
then we kick ourselves for 75 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Alder.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd.
Oh, yeah, just a follow-up again about the commercial issue, commercial uses. Is there an argument for, and I'm thinking not just in terms of this development, but also future development, is there an argument for not having commercial, once again, as part of this development? Or, for example, the need to maximize housing units? Or is this something that simply just hasn't been sort of decided or addressed at this point?
Sure, I can answer that. Yeah, I think in following sort of what we learn about best practices, you need a certain housing density to support commercial uses. And given that this is sort of on the far edge of the city, we don't expect there to be very dense housing uses to the west of this at all. And the neighboring uses are also very low density in general. So we felt that overall, commercial uses out here would just not be supported by enough users. That's not the word I wanted, but wouldn't be supported by enough users because there's the housing density is just not high enough.
Thank you. Jeff, did you have something that you wanted to
Yeah.
add?
So this is effectively the edge of the city of Madison. So we have an agreement with the town of Middleton that essentially, if you extend Meadow Road north, that's the dividing line between the town of Middleton and city of Madison. We're seeing the Ice Age Trail as kind of the open space buffer between the town of Verona, city of Verona, and city of Madison. And again, the densities for this particular area, or the plan we're talking about, just aren't high enough, like as Kirsty was saying, to support retail. I think Verona would definitely benefit, their population if commercial was built out here versus the city of Madison population. So those are kind of the reasons why we weren't looking to do a mixed use component or a straight commercial retail component in this particular plan. We wanted to maximize the number of Madison residents who are adjacent to this great planned open space corridor so that they could take advantage of that natural resource. So those are the reasons.
Thank you, Jeff. Alder Paulson.
You actually hit on my first question I was going to ask about mixed use instead of just pure commercial. If there was some opportunity to maybe leave some mixed use as a possibility in there, but I understand why you. But I won't belabor that. The unrelated question was actually about kind of some traffic studies in Woods Road and kind of anticipating just where do we think some of traffic is flowing. Epic's just down the road, and I was kind of wondering if Woods Road picks up for traffic, where is it coming from beforehand? Is it coming down through what is it, Red Hawk Trail or Red Tail Drive or something? Just kind of what traffic flow might look like as we continue to blow things out, and if we have some kind of sense for where that is. And I realize it may be just too hard to even try to model, to figure out what's happening there. And I'll just mention the last time I drove on Woods Road, I was actually kind of nervous about driving on it because it's this kind of narrow road in the middle of the woods, and traffic is kind of terrible on it. And now it has been a long time since I've been out there, but it did feel a little more narrow, a little more like old school county road. something more like I'd find in northern Wisconsin than
Okay.
in a residential part of Dane County. So
Kirsty?
Yeah. So I think that our sense is that the existing traffic on Woods Road is headed to Epic, which is just down Northern Lights Road to the south a bit. So that's the sense that we get. Some residents I think also mentioned that to us as well. Yeah, the speed limit on Woods Road is currently 45 miles per hour, and on a somewhat narrow road that does feel a bit fast, which we heard directly from some of the residents. It's kind of hard to anticipate the increased traffic. There would certainly be a bit of an increase in the traffic. I'm not sure that I could quantify that. But I think once this road would be rebuilt and upgraded to an urban cross section, it would definitely be able to handle the traffic that it would be added to it.
Thank you, Kirsty. Did you have any follow-ups, Alder Paulson? No. Okay, thank you. I do have a question. Is there any reason that you did not consider, or maybe you did consider and dismissed it, housing mix 3 on Midtown at all? Because that's a fairly busy street and getting busier. And you commented you wanted to offer opportunity for City of Madison residents to live next to the great amenity of the Ice Age Trail. So why not have a little bit higher density there on Midtown Road?
Sure, that's a good question. So I think one place, I guess, potentially we could recommend that, and I think we did consider whether or not that would make sense on Midtown Road, would be in this general area. We do need to get a road through here to connect to Tearsall Drive, and it's pretty narrow generally. Potentially this smaller piece could make sense. I think that we wouldn't recommend it over here as it's truly the far edge of the city. Topography over there is a little bit tricky, and that so that's why we have a lower density recommendation in this area. So going from those higher intensity apartments without sort of a housing mix 2 transition to the housing mix 1 is why we went with housing mix 2 over in this portion of Midtown. It looks like Jeff would also like to comment on the question.
Jeff?
Yeah, that area, what is it? Well, the eastern area where we're showing housing mix 2 along Midtown. Yeah, I think we tended to put it where it kind of further inbound to the site, just for space purposes. There is already a natural drainage way that runs through there, and the area with the roads kind of naturally gets a little bit tighter. So I think it would be harder to develop with your typical housing mix 3 apartment building in there. It seems with the spacing of Tearsall Drive, it's more advantageous to put in housing mix 2, like a townhome along Midtown Road, just for the depth of the street, just the way it was placed in there and how it would extend out. We also did get a request from the Draggers who own that property to see if there would be a way to preserve their property, to preserve their home. And that would fit within housing mix 2. There's that red dot there. Not saying that will ultimately happen, but it's more of a space issue to be able to fit apartment style buildings along Midtown Road, given the stormwater and given the already laid out street connections.
Thank you for that additional information. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. In a similar vein, I was actually looking along Woods Road where you have housing mix 3. Any thoughts on extending that one block in to the west so that there's kind of housing mix 3 on either side of that interior street? Surrounded
Um,
by,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
was just gonna say, no, just, and then, keeping the housing mix 2 after that, but it seems like one of the few areas that's still far enough from the trail where you could add another section of a little more density.
I
Thank
think that's
you.
something that could be considered. Uh, yeah, I'm not thinking of a reason why we would absolutely not want to do that, but yeah, we could consider that.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Did you have any follow-ups?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, don't see any other raised hands, so then we would be getting into the questions. I would just like to comment before we do that I like Commissioner Solheim's suggestion of housing mix 3, that one block in. So I would urge that be seriously considered. So commissioners, do you agree with the changes in minimum density for housing mix 1 and housing mix 2? And can you please get rid of the share screen so we can see
Oh,
each other a
sure.
little better? Thank you.
Yeah.
So housing mix of 1 previously up to 8 dwelling units per acre, and they are proposing between 6 and 12 dwelling units per acre. So it's a pretty modest increase. Could I either get comments or thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs up, I see everybody likes that idea. Okay, housing mix 2, previously 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre and proposing between 12 and 20 dwelling units per acre. Any comments or, and again, it's a very modest change. Is there support for that? Commissioner Fernandez, I don't know what you're saying. Oh, you like it. It's a heart. Okay, got it. I can read thumbs up better. Okay. It looks like everybody is on board with that too. And then second question, do you agree with limiting housing mix 1 to only the areas to the northwest part of the planning area? Yes, I'm seeing agreement. Yes, I don't see any disagreement. Good. Okay, thank you. And do you agree with the locations recommended for housing mix 3? And again, we have had a suggestion of extending that. Could I get some input on other commissioners, whether you like the idea that Commissioner Solheim suggested? Maybe for Commissioner Solheim's suggestion, if you can let us know that too. Okay, so people do agree with that. That's a slight expansion of housing mix 3. Okay, so I'm going to look back to Kirsty and Jeff. Do you have everything that you were looking for? Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Okay, good. Anything else from any of the commissioners? Seeing no raised hands, thank you very much for the presentation and the response to all the questions. And thanks for the good engagement, commissioners, on this item. Next, we will move to agenda items 3, 4, 5, and 6. They are related and we will consider them as one public hearing. Following the public hearing, the Plan Commission shall make separate findings and motions on each agenda item. So I'll read these items into the record. Agenda item 3, Legistar 73363, located at 117 through 125 North Butler Street, 2nd Alder District. Consideration of a demolition permit to demolish multifamily dwellings at 117, 123, and 125 North Butler Street. Agenda item 4, Legistar 73643, creating section 28.022 through 00591 of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of property located at 117 through 125 North Butler Street, 2nd Alder District, from Downtown Residential 1 District to Downtown Residential 2 District. Agenda item 5, Legistar 73364, same locations, Second Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the proposed downtown residential 2 district for a multifamily dwelling with greater than 8 units to allow construction of a 4-story 32-unit apartment building. Agenda item 6, Legistar 73373, approving a certified survey map of property owned by 119 North Butler Street LLC, located at 117 through 125 North Butler Street, Second Alder District. First, we will have a presentation by staff member Lisa McNabolo. Am I pronouncing that right? Could you?
McNabola.
McNabola.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a
very
tricky
much.
one. So
Thank you.
no problem there. All right. So thank you. And as the chair stated, before the commission now are 4 applications related to the redevelopment of 117, 119, 123, and 125 North Butler Street. And this includes the consideration of a demolition permit, zoning map amendment, conditional use permit, and certified survey map, all to allow a 4-story 32-unit residential building. And a detailed discussion and recommendation for each application is in the staff report. And I will be primarily focusing on the zoning map amendment and conditional use discussions. So the comprehensive plan recommends medium residential for the site, which is recommended for 20 to 90 dwelling units per acre to occur in 2 to 5-story buildings. And staff believe that the rezone request is generally consistent with the medium residential land use category. Then we also have the downtown plan that applies to this development, and that's going to include more specific recommendations for the downtown area. And that plan recommends predominant residential as the generalized future land use. And then this also includes the downtown height map recommendations, which recommends a maximum building height of 4 stories in the area. And then the downtown plan is also broken down into different planning areas. And per the plan, this site is located in the James Madison Park neighborhood planning area, which is characterized by fairly intact blocks of 2 to 3-story residential structures. And then there's also an objective for this neighborhood in the plan. And that states that the neighborhood should accommodate a mix of dwelling units, some of which are suitable for families and children, and the renovation of existing houses coupled with selective redevelopment that generally reflects the scale and rhythm of existing structures should help reinvigorate the area, provide a variety of housing options, including workforce housing, and strengthen linkages to the adjacent Tenny Lapham neighborhood. So that's sort of just the general outline of what the downtown plan says for this neighborhood. And then the proposal includes a request to change the zoning from the DR1 district to the DR2 district. And the predominant zoning district in the neighborhood is DR1. And those 2 zoning districts are similar, but staff would point out one notable difference, which is that in the DR1 district, there is a maximum building width of 60 feet, whereas the DR2 district does not have that maximum building width standard. And that's the primary reason why the applicant is requesting the zoning map amendment, is to exceed that building width of 60 feet. And generally, staff believes that a rezone to DR2 is a significant policy consideration, and that actions on this request may establish a precedent that could be applied to similar requests in other portions of the James Madison Park neighborhood. And a detailed discussion of the plan recommendations is included in the report. So I'm just going to kind of go over the highlights of that discussion, and would note that the downtown plan does not definitively recommend that more intensive zoning be established among this kind of largely contiguous area of DR1 zone properties. However, staff believe that it could be argued that if a larger apartment building form could be allowed in this neighborhood, that North Butler Street would be among the streets in which a larger building form could be allowed. So there's the limited references in the plan to allowing more intensive development. And if it can be found adequate to ultimately support the approval of a rezone. Staff would just encourage the Plan Commission to make site-specific findings, differentiating this from other portions of the neighborhood, just referring more to that kind of precedential nature of the request for a rezone in this area. So that would be the staff request for that discussion. And then regarding the conditional use standards, staff provided additional discussion regarding standard 9, which states that when applying the above standards to any new construction of a building or to an addition, the Plan Commission shall find that the project creates an environment of sustained aesthetic desirability compatible with the existing or intended character of the area and the statement of purpose for the zoning district. And there's some discussion about the building itself, and staff would ask the Plan Commission to consider the scale and rhythm of the building as expressed through the building footprint and material composition as it relates to the surrounding properties. And this tries to get at the language in the downtown plan, which is really looking for development that is compatible with the scale and rhythm of the James Madison Park planning area. And that's all I have for the staff report, and I would be happy to answer any other questions after the public hearing.
Thank you, Lisa. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Reese Fisher, North Franklin Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. And he is representing or is the developer. Reese, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hello, my name is Reese Fisher. My brother and I, Blake, are looking to develop these 4 parcels on North Butler Street into 32 apartments. I'd like to start off with a little background info on us. We have a strong connection to this neighborhood and these blocks. I'm 31 years old and my brother is 28 years old. We have both lived our entire lives within 2 blocks of this site. We were raised in a house at 107 North Hancock Street where our parents still live. Blake currently owns and completely renovated a single-family home at 118 North Hancock Street, which is almost directly behind this project. I live less than 2 blocks away in a property I own on North Franklin Street. We are proposing this project to give Madison a small boost to the much-needed housing situation in downtown Madison in this transitional block of Butler Street, which hasn't had any major investments for a very long time. It's a block that could use some revitalization. We are excited to be here tonight to present our project to you. These current sites have been studied to be developed since 2008. Many of you have heard past proposals for this project site that frankly weren't as innovative in their approach nor working to complement and enhance this area of Butler Street. I believe one of those proposals of greater density was actually approved in 2018. I want to emphasize that this is an entirely new development team and a new project approach that looks to create an innovative and sustainable project that complements and enhances this transitional area between the downtown core and the residential neighborhoods to the east. Some have suggested that this sets a precedent for this neighborhood, and we would suggest that it does. It sets a thoughtful approach to developing transitional areas on the boundaries of neighborhoods that allows for a seamless and thoughtful transition between densities within the urban fabric. Myself and my brother are driving these efforts along with Case 4 Architecture and a team of professionals paying close attention to the details and context in which this project sits. Our strong connection to the neighborhood over our lifetime means that we are invested in seeing this neighborhood evolve and grow along with the city as a whole. We care deeply about this neighborhood and will continue to invest our time and resources into making it a better place for everyone. We have been in the neighborhood our entire lives and will continue that connection for the future. We look forward to presenting to the Plan Commission and continuing with this process that we have been working to refine for the last 18 months. We'd like to thank Alder Hecht for being with us every step of the process and helping facilitate discussions. We'd like to thank all the neighbors who have been so supportive of the project and thank all of you on the Planning Commission and everyone here tonight for taking time to listen to our presentation. At this point, I'd like to pass it off to our architects, Mark and Paul, to discuss the project in more detail.
The next registrant is Paul Cuta, Regent Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing Reese Fisher. Paul, you have 3 minutes.
I'm actually, my time is part of the 9 minutes. So that should be turned over to Mark.
You want it to be Mark next? Okay.
Well, we're supposed to have, we were told that we would have 9 minutes in combination. So I defer to Mark.
Okay, and so Paul, did you want to go next or do you want Mark to go next?
Mark, please.
Okay, so then the next speaker is Mark Shellpfeffer, 4414 Regent Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing Reese Fisher.
Excellent. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Commission, for the opportunity to present. I just have up here our development team. Reese introduced himself. Case 4 is the architectural component. We have Christina from the landscape architect side with Psyche Design that's available to answer questions, as well as Angie Black is on, I believe, is on virtually. So next slide, please. As Lisa started to describe, our project is looking at developing a 4-story, what we're calling courtyard-like building with a resident outdoor roof terrace, as well as usable open space to the rear of the building. 32 units totaling 9 2-bedroom units, 19 1-bedroom units, and 4 studio units. That's over top of 24 below-grade parking stalls, as well as bike parking. There's 32 bike parking stalls below grade, 4 for guests and visitors at grade, and then 4 moped stalls below grade as well. Lisa described what we're here tonight asking for, and we have demolition, rezoning, conditional use, as well as the CSM. So I'm not going to get into that too much. Reese referenced all of the projects and proposals that have come before you over the last 16, 14 years, something like that. The one that was approved in 2018, to give you a sense of scale and density, was denser than the project that we're bringing to you tonight. And the units that were within that building were of a smaller scale. So we're really looking to try to create units that are of a larger scale, even though they're 1 and 2-bedroom units, they're units that are of a greater scale than what was previously brought forward. As we started the process, next slide, please. As we started the process, as Lisa discussed, we also went through the comprehensive plan, which identifies this site as medium residential. She talked about the density. I've talked regarding the density of past projects. But we really do see this as the missing middle, not only related to the scale and the transitional areas between what we see as kind of the downtown core or the higher density development up towards the square. When we get into talking about the parking garage across Butler Street, that scale and the density that's suggested in the comprehensive plan is related to downtown core, which really is the highest intensity use allowed in the comp plan. And when we start to look at this, we start to look at how do we transition, and we see this area as a transitional component to the overall landscape of downtown. Next slide. When we looked at the downtown plan, we looked to those areas that Lisa had talked about, encouraging higher density infill redevelopment that will innovate and sustain and complements and enhances the areas in which they're proposed. We're looking to provide a framework within the overall fabric of downtown, whether it's housing, retail. This is a project that starts to fit into that fabric. Item 4, it's not the intent. I think this is a major point that we saw in the comp plan and the downtown plan related to the neighborhood boundaries, and specifically calling out that it's not the intent of a plan to strictly delineate downtown neighborhoods and districts by drawing hard edges on a map, but generally defining them and strengthening those qualities that make them unique places while promoting permeable boundaries that weave together to form a cohesive downtown. As I mentioned, the parking garage and the density that's happening as you move towards the square, and the relation of kind of that house-like residential as you move down Franklin and Hancock, we really do see this edge, this boundary between neighborhoods as being that permeable area on Butler Street. And we're going to talk about how we've looked at articulating this building to allow it to fit in and become a scale and rhythm of a street edge that's currently there, but also starts that transitional component as we move through the larger scale of things. Next slide. When we look specifically at the James Madison Park neighborhood and its objective, the idea of accommodating a mix of dwelling units, I think we see that as a mix not only in dwelling types, but also forms and typologies that house those types. So the idea of renovation of existing houses coupled with selective redevelopment that generally reflects the scale and rhythm is what we're looking at in this project, and the way we're articulating the street face, the building materials being used really help to work through that. Focusing on larger units and ample open space, we'll get into that in a minute, related to kind of, as I mentioned, the larger scale of units as compared to what was previously approved, as well as the idea of creating truly usable open space for this project. I think the key items that we looked at related to recommendation 104 and 105 are really what differentiates Butler from Blair, Franklin, and Hancock. Butler Street really talks about relatively higher density development, where recommendation 105 calls out the idea of the infill and the redevelopment of those streets being something in the scale and design that is predominantly house-like neighborhood character. And I think we would not disagree with that. And I think that's where we're talking about this project really being a transition between those two items. So, next slide. This is just a slide that outlines the current zoning of DR1, the proposed zoning of DR2, and our current concept. I think what I want to highlight is the current concept and the idea of the lot coverage that we're looking at is 59% as compared to the max lot coverage of 75 in DR1 and 80% in DR2. And then the usable open space, really the fact that we're somewhere between five times more, potentially 6 times more in DR1 and 10 times more in DR2. So we're really trying to create an environment for the tenants of the building to be able to use the outside space. Next slide. As we look at the site highlighted in the map, we start to talk about just the existing concept, context, and the idea of Butler Street really being this transition zone of the parking garage to what I call kind of the southwestish of the site. But also really when you're on the street on Butler Street, what is the perception as you're moving along the structures? You're really moving along structures that are really tightly organized with each other, and you begin to understand the articulation of those faces. So as we get into the proposal, we look at how are we articulating that face. Next slide. This is just a diagram of the structures along Butler Street. The lower portion is giving you a sense of the scale of those faces, the insertion of the figure ground of the proposed building, and the articulation of those faces as you move along. You can see kind of the court component of that building, of that 25 feet, 4 inches between kind of the two main forms of the body. The diagram above really starts to look at what is that perception as you're moving along the other side of the street, and how do you see back between buildings? The reality is those buildings are very tight to each other. So the perception really becomes the articulated face along the street. Next slide. Again, this is just kind of images from both sides of the street as you're moving up. What is that perception of kind of the porch articulation, the form articulation? You're not really reading individual buildings as you move on these streets. You're reading faces and how they're articulated. Next. This is just a couple of examples of how close some of those properties are. The one on the left is actually 125 North Butler, which would be demolished as part of this project. And we would create additional space between the neighbor to the north. Next slide. Few images of the existing structures.
Thank you. That concludes your available time. I think was that 3 minutes or 6 minutes, Heather?
Well, It should have been.
It was 9. It was
I'm
9.
sorry, Heather?
Yes, Chair Zellers, that was 9 minutes for Mark Schulpepper's testimony.
Okay. Thank you. Our next registrant is Brian Tydrich, North Hancock Street, in support, wishing to speak. Brian, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'll go as fast as I can, even though these are 4 different items on the element. First of all, I want to say that involving in the steering committee report, I just wanted to emphasize that the majority of the people that did respond did approve to this development. There are some references to some people were opposed to it, but those people, for the large part, were anonymous. We don't know who they were or where they came from, which I thought was kind of odd. But I just don't want the committee to get the impression that the majority was not in favor of this development. They are. A lot of good conversation regarding the staff report. I'm going to focus on that too, because the biggest opposition seems to be the scale of this property. And I think it's really important to go back and look at the plan. Most of those objections seem to keep going back to objective 4.11, which basically states, or they're relying on the fact that those are 3 and 4 unit buildings. But I would say that the planners had a different point when it came to this. And that is why they drew out these individual recommendations that were in there. And North Butler was specifically called out in recommendation 104 as one that would have larger or higher density for that area, while reinforcing the more house-like development on Hancock and on Franklin and Blair Streets. So I don't think you can say that 411 overrides recommendation 104 when they specifically called out some blocks for more house-like development and other blocks that could have potentially higher density development. So I think it's really important to keep that into consideration. I know that you're making, as a committee, what could be a referential decision, and I would encourage you to keep that in mind. But I would also encourage you to keep in mind that the density requirements of the city, the housing stock issues that we have, all those things are very important. I guess the other thing that I would just say, as a resident of this particular block, I've lived here for 15 years. I can see where this development would be from my backyard. I know the Fishers fairly well because I lived across the street and I watched Reese and Blake grow up. And I think that the neighborhood would be well suited by having local invested landlords. One of the things that we don't have in this neighborhood, we have a lot of transient renters and people that don't live in the neighborhood that own properties. I think that having people that are centered here and have an appreciation for the neighborhood is very important. So I can't say enough how much I support this development. I think it's very important. The only other thing that I would want to say is we talk a lot about scale and rhythm in the neighborhood. If you walk around within a half a block, you're going to see much larger developments to the north and to the south. You are going to see multi-unit buildings as you go east as well. And of course, we have to keep bringing it up, even though people seem to think that you can pull a screen down and block it out. But there is a 3-story parking garage immediately across the street. No matter what type of building you put in there, that building is there. And it's within the scope and the scale of the neighborhood as well. So I think this fits. So that's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Our next registrant is Lupe Montez, North Hancock Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Lupe?
Sure, there's no person in attendance by that name.
Okay. The next registrant is Gary Tipler, Jennifer Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Gary, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I have long been a resident of the Isthmus and have been familiar with most buildings and most blocks all these years. I got a chance to go in the 3 subject buildings. Actually, there was a 4th a few years ago, and one of them was moved down to Johnson Street and nicely renovated. The other one, 117, has a pleasant look on the outside, but it was a spec house and it was not very well built, not the highest quality built on the inside, and I wouldn't recommend its preservation. That seemed to one that was, for which judgment was withheld. I would agree with the commission on 123 and 125 for demolition. The setting is very important, and I learned a few things with previous speakers. The setting across the street from the massive McCormick parking garage really kind of demands a different consideration for what would go up on this side of the street, melding old with new. And I think this site is perfectly appropriate for something different than the other buildings that had previously been imagined. The setback with the courtyard and that sort of thing lends a sort of respects the rhythm of the mass and open space up and down the street. Another thing that I find in my neighborhood is that it's buildings that have nice apartments, that from those are the sources of growth for people and families who eventually buy houses and renovate, buy houses and invest in them nearby. So they come as visitors, as 1 year or 2 year tenants, and then circumstances change to become homeowners and raise their kids in the neighborhood. I've seen it happen so many times. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I see that Alder Heck has his hand raised. Alder?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let you know that Lupe Montez is in the attendee list under a different name, Lupita. I'm not sure how you deal with that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Jesse can find her then, Lupita, I guess. And if you do, then we will loop back and hear from her. Our next registrant is Eric Minton, North Butler Street, in support and wishing to speak. Eric, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you all. I'm feeling fairly excited about something happening in this space. I've lived just up the street since 1989. I believe it might have been 1988, but a long time. So I almost have dinosaur status here by now. This block is particularly difficult, and some of these houses and in particular on the corner have had some difficult history. And in nearly 31, 32, 33 years of being here, the big house on the corner, the 5 unit is, it might even be 6, has been a drug house for some time. And we've been on the phone with the Madison police, certainly weekly, but sometimes multiple times per week. This is not all stuff that to sit around and celebrate. And Gary pointed out that it does have a unique pizzazz, if you want to say, sitting directly across from some of these sort of oversized, outdated 1970s planters with the McCormick ramp, and I guess it has a different name now. But adding new quality units in this area would be very helpful in this neighborhood. It would, the added street traffic and energy with the added housing is noticeable. It is truly noticeable. And each project that's come along, well, scrutinized in many ways against all kinds of criteria, the end result is that quality housing for more people that want to be in this neighborhood is helpful. And I hope this project can happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. The next registrant is Kimberly Novak, North Franklin Street, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Kimberly, you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm wondering if we can see a picture of the new development. The architect was not able to show that. Can we go back to have him show that or no?
We have seen those
Okay,
pictures, so
okay.
please go ahead with your
Doesn't matter.
testimony.
Okay. I'm a neighbor. I've lived here since 2013. I own a historic home in the neighborhood, so I am 110% about historic preservation. I'm not a fan of buildings that can no longer be occupied and cause, I guess, a questionable area to the neighborhood. It's right down the street from a homeless shelter. it's not safe to have 3 unoccupied buildings in the neighborhood that have just been sitting there. I think our neighborhood would benefit from a redevelopment of these 3 buildings. I feel that we are lucky to have people who have had their roots in this neighborhood be the developers. So you could actually go knock on the developer's door if you have an issue with them. As much as you don't want to, you might need to, and I have. The developers have been good to their neighbors, and I don't think that has been pointed out yet. My 80-year-old neighbor just moved in, and the Fishers do their snow removal for them. They did their snow removal for me when I was pregnant, and they still do it. So these are things they don't go off and explain to others, but they are good neighbors, and they care about the people who have their roots in the neighborhood. We do not have many people who have owner-occupied homes. So the argument for the goal is preserving the downtown neighborhoods made up of predominantly single-family residential structures that was in one of the letters, I believe is null and void, because there are 3 people on my street that have owner-occupied single-family homes. Everything else is a multifamily unit. The Fishers have 2 single-family homes across the way that they occupy. They will occupy the back of where the building will back up to. Another thing is that they're dog-friendly, and that creates a sense of community. The people that have dogs, we talk to, we become friends with. They're creating enough green space for people that do have dogs. Hasn't been brought up. I recommend this building. I think that it would be a disservice to the community to not allow people who have had their roots here be willing to do a development. Our neighborhood group was not extremely active on the side of, they were active in support due to wanting this to go through, obviously. The opposition, I want to point out, came from people who do not physically live in this neighborhood. There are also multiple developments in the neighborhood in all different architecture styles. It's across the street from a parking deck. I've lived across the street from a parking deck.
Thank you, Kimberly. That concludes your available time. Okay, we're going to loop back now to the earlier registrant, Lupita Montez, and North Hancock Street, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Lupe, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Liddell, and everyone else. I am in support, but if I can, a lot of people have said what I said. I'd like to give my 3 minutes to the architect, Mark, if you want my 3 minutes.
I'm sorry, that's not something you can do, but please go ahead with comments that you have, Lupe.
Why can't I give him my time?
Because he expended his time. He had 9 minutes, and that's the maximum that the development team could have. But if you have something that you want to say, please go ahead.
I do. I am in support. My husband and I have lived on North Hancock since 2008. We are Cliff and Jane's neighbors. We have seen them raise their boys. I am so excited that they're taking over their dad's business. They lived it, they were raised in it, and to know that there is going to be people who were not just born and raised, but to continue the services that they've been raised with, it's pretty exciting. Kimberly was right in saying that even though the Cliff is a landlord on several properties, he is known to clean the entire street. You don't get that in another neighborhood. We do need the spaces that they are proposing. Most of the neighbors are in favor of this proposal going through. I have not met, honestly, someone who is not, other than people that live outside of James Madison Park. The I think it's much needed. When I first moved here, shortly, I was put on the housing committee. That's all we talked about. We were short in apartments. Now that this development is coming up, it seems like as long as it's, something related to Cliff Fisher, which this is not because his boys are taking it over, it's a no. I don't understand. He gives so much to the community, not just in cleaning snow, but if you ever need him, he is never one to say no. And I think his boys are going to be the same way. Those are my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Lupe. The next registrant is Tim Camps, West Washington Avenue, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. Tim, you have 3 minutes.
Sure, there's no person in attendance by that name.
Okay. Moving on then. Let me just see if there's anybody else who wishes to speak. It doesn't look like it. We do have some registrants available to answer questions. Angie Black, West Washington Avenue, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing Reese Fisher and the Fisher family. Just checking through the list. Then also Christopher Sina, Park Street, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing Psyche Design. Brett Schulpenner, North Franklin Street, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Blake Fisher, North Hancock, Madison, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. That concludes our registrant list. Are there questions of any of our registrants? Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. I was just wondering if the architect could speak and maybe the plans could be brought up. Just specifically, I was wondering if they could talk us through some of the articulation in the front and the courtyard area that's developed over time.
Mark Shelpeffer? Yes. Please go ahead.
All right. Is Lisa able to bring up the PDFs?
Yeah, I can share the screen and feel free to direct me to the appropriate slide.
If you want to go to probably the next one that we were going to get to, there's a landscape plan, maybe a few back from this. Yeah, there you go. I think as we were talking, this idea of articulating and creating a rhythm and scale along the street edge is something we really focused on. So this landscape plan hopefully starts to highlight that a little, and then we'll look at a couple of images that will do that further. So the use of not only the building form, but the material to create kind of what we're seeing as 2 masses of play on the street edge. So there's the mass on the left that you see, which is roughly 50 feet wide. The mass on the right is roughly 28 to 29 feet wide. And then the void between them, or the court between them, is starting to create that breath or the chatter in the in and out. That's very similar to what's happening as you move along the street edge now. Is it a wider building? Yes. I think what we were trying to argue is that when you're moving along that street, the perception that you're moving along a wall of building, and you're moving along a wall of building that's articulated in a fashion that makes it approachable. So the use of the landscaping to start to create this kind of softening edge up to the building, but then also the landscaping that moves into the courtyard that not only gives another layer to the elevation, but it starts to give something of visual interest for the tenants that are within the building on the upper floors to view down to. That same kind of articulation starts to happen along the back of the building as well, with the elevated terrace of the units for the first floor, the balconies that come off of them, and then the large outdoor lawn space that's to the rear of the yard. Lisa, if you want to move to maybe some of those 3D images, that could also help to articulate it. The other component I think that we can touch on is this idea of a roof terrace that's pulled back from the edge of the building. So the idea is if you're up there, you're not viewing down on your neighbor, but you're seeing longer views out over the city. But here, the idea with the building forms and again the materials. So we're incorporating a cast stone, which is the kind of tan.
Let me just ask Commissioner Solheim, did that answer your question? And did you have follow-up?
It did, although actually my follow-up question was about the materials that was in the staff report of, some changes needed to be made to the base. So if you could add just a little bit on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, please.
So the materials, the lighter color, the buff colored is a cast stone, and then there's a masonry unit or brick that starts to combine, as well as 2 colors of lap siding. So the play of these various materials start to break down the overall scale. Staff did have some comments related to the lap siding, and Lisa, you can probably point to kind of the balcony, that the walkout unit. There's some areas where we were showing lap siding coming down at the grade. We can certainly work with staff to allow some of that brick to return and create those forms in a fashion that meets kind of the intent of the code. It's ironic because the majority of the structures on that walk are lap siding. So, but we understand that, and we can work through that. I think the other components related to the composite siding are the decks at the corners. So this idea of the decks eroding the corners and breaking down the overall scale of the building is just another way related to how are we creating a rhythm and scale along the street edge that you're moving past. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that did. Thank you very much. That's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Commissioner Shepherd.
Yeah, if the team could just confirm in the staff report, I think on page 8 and also I think on page 6, it mentions that you may have done a view shed study. Could you confirm if that has actually taken place? And in the report, it mentions again that nothing significant was found, but can you talk about that?
Mark?
Yep. Yeah, I can certainly do that. Yeah, staff had asked us to look at the Lamp House ad hoc committee report and determine how this building related to kind of the overall study of that. We placed the building within that. We utilized kind of the DCI map related to grading that's throughout Dane County. And the reality was the views from kind of that 3rd floor balcony of the Lamp House out to Lake Mendota, there was no effect of this building, even with the elevator overrun. That would be the highest point. There was no effect on that view study. We used a model that was provided by the city that was also utilized as part of that study. So I think that probably answers your question.
Thank you, Mark.
I would just suggest maybe that included in the record, in the file. I did not see it in the materials.
City staff has a copy of that response from us, along with some images of those.
Commissioner, did you have any further questions, Commissioner Shepherd? No, you're good? Okay. Lisa, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I did just want to note that that viewshed study is posted on Legistar under a letter of intent addendum. Perhaps should have been titled view study, I'm thinking now after the fact, but it is available for the record under all 4 Legistar files.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Alder Heck.
Thank you. Mark, I assume this question is for you. I noticed condition number 14 in the staff report mentions stormwater needing to be entirely directed to the right of way. And knowing what the slope of the land is there, I wondered if that would be any problem to not have any stormwater flowing to the rear of the property.
Am I still unmuted?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Alder Heck, I think we had those conversations early with the civil engineer. He's aware of the fact that moving water to the right of way was probably the direction we were going to need to be going. We had some initial conversations with city engineering related to the possibility of allowing for easements to drain in the other direction, kind of towards Hancock, but I think there's solutions that can be in place to bring it all to the right of way. So,
okay, I'll assume that staff is going to work with you on that. Thank you. One more question. This might be for you, Mark. I'm not sure if these demolitions are approved. Two of the three houses have some historic value according to the Landmarks Commission. And would you be willing to accept a condition that they would not be demolished for perhaps 60 days, I think is what we typically do. It maybe 30, we'll have to check, to a pause in the demolition so that the houses could be advertised to be moved somewhere else if someone elsewhere in the city were to be industrious enough to want to move those houses to a new location rather than lose them to demolition?
I'll let Reese commit to that. I will say within the schedule, I think a 30 to 60 days from the point of I'll call it approval by the Plan Commission or approval as we start to answer the conditions approval. That would not affect any sort of timing on our end from a construction side. But I'll leave it to Reese to answer that if that's okay.
Thanks.
And typically, I think that the cost of demolition has been contributed to the moving, if that is something that comes about. So I would ask that also. So Reese, is that something that would be acceptable to you? So if we could get Reese Fisher up, please.
Okay, can you guys hear me again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, if there's somebody that really wants the houses, has a site for them and has the means to move them, I would not have a problem delaying the project slightly to allow somebody to work that out. I mean, I'm assuming that's fairly expensive, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars probably along with a potential site. But if there's somebody that steps forward that wants them, they can take them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Those were my questions.
Okay, thank you. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I've got a question. They might both be for the architect, but maybe one of them will be for the developer. First off, I was wondering if you could go back to the presentation and if there are any other 3D renderings that weren't included in the submittal letter, but might be in your presentation. One of the things that was kind of missing was any sort of like, I guess, head-on view. So finding the actual front door of the place is not well shown in any of those 3D views, and I was wondering if you had a view that was a little better for that.
Yeah. Lisa, are you able to pull up the presentation again? We only put in what we had submitted at the direction of staff. So
okay,
but I can certainly point you to the idea of the entry between the plan and the images that we do have.
Okay, well, maybe we could go back to this view from the south, from the southwest, which I think is that's the northwest one, and there's a southwest one coming from the other one, because that'll get to sort of my other question. I think that's downhill. I lived in the neighborhood for a long time, and so I'm used to this street, and so I'm having a hard time remembering that downhill is north. Downhill feels south for me for whatever reason. But I did want to ask a little bit of question about, I guess, that very south corner. And I will say that how that street reads to me, and I've walked up and down Butler Street many, many, many times. So what reads to me on Butler, more important even than the compactness of the buildings, is actually the entryways to each of the units, right? It's the stairs and the porches and you keep coming, every couple of feet you're at a new building because you see the stairs into it and you see the stairs into it. And so I'm just kind of wondering, is there anything you can do, especially on that corner, that southwest corner, to maybe make it feel like a second entryway? And like just that's sort of what I am feeling like is a little bit missing. I appreciate what's being done. And I'm not an architect, so if I make some nonsense statement about something, I apologize. But I appreciate what's being done on the porches up above, and I like that entryway. I'm not a fan of the garage door. Like that's definitely not anything that occurs elsewhere on that block, but I don't know how else to do anything. And so anything you can do to kind of make that pretend not to be a garage door is helpful. But I'm kind of zeroing in on that last corner there to say, just from a anything to make it feel like more like a read. It looks like maybe there's a little bit of a wall to kind of divide that off, but if there's something more to do to help it make you feel like there's a little bit of another entrance somewhere in the area that I think does a really great job of it is down a couple blocks on Johnson Street, where there's a really big lawn building, but they've got really great entrances that really made it feel like it preserved the rhythm of those structures. So that was one of the things I was really looking at. I'll just leave it at that. So.
Are you talking about City Row as the example?
City Row is another example of where a nice sort of rhythm of the entryways is very much preserved on what actually is just if you took that off, it looks like a pretty regular, double loaded or long corridor, double loaded apartment building. But those entryways preserve the rhythm. So I'm just kind of really curious if there's something that can be done to help add a little bit more entryway feel to that corner.
Mark?
I feel like we're maybe there.
Yeah. Lisa, would you be able to go back to the site plan? Or the landscape plan? I'm sorry. Yeah, there you go. I think to your comment about the idea of how do we continue that rhythm of moving up to the porches, that corner, what we've tried to do, we're dealing, as you also point, we're dealing with the grade as we go down the hill. So what we're trying to do is keep the building as low as we can without getting it up out of the ground for the sake of creating a true kind of walk-up front porch. So when we're on that south corner, it's really it's an at-grade entry. So what we've created is we've allowed that kind of patio condition for that unit to come out to the face and come out in line with the rest of the porches that are moving up and down the street. There is kind of a stone retaining wall that gives that corner a little sense of privacy, so the tenant doesn't feel like they're out there on display. But the idea was just that of creating this rhythm of the walk up, the main entry that you see as you move down to the left on the page. There's a couple of steps up into that entry sequence, kind of a signature planter that could have some signage within it for the building, and then the kind of the main portion of visitor bike parking that identifies the next third of the building. And then we move down in the planted area, the landscaped area with the vegetation out front is kind of the common lobby space for the tenants. So there's a kind of a high top table and messaging board, TV that's within there that looks out from that point. So it's really trying to create that sense that you're talking about of kind of these front doors to the building in a manner that clearly identifies what the main entry is versus a tenant space, but allowing that tenant space to be something that's more engaging with the street edge than just putting a fence up at the building face and making it a smaller kind of balcony or patio condition. So I agree. It'd be interesting to see it up a little higher. We're just trying to be sympathetic to try to keep the building as low as we can as we move down the hill. in dealing with kind of the section of moving into the parking ramp and those components as well. So,
Okay,
that help?
sure. I would maybe challenge you to think a little bit more about some street engagement there. The privacy walls, I would point out that all the other porches people are sort of on display as they sit out there, and I appreciate that people have privacy and security concerns, but if there's some opportunities to still kind of rethink that to make that just feel a little bit more like the porches and where people are sitting out, and a little more like the other porches, I think would be really helpful. Then I have a completely unrelated question, about as
Go ahead.
unrelated as we can go. The applicant talked a little bit about some sustainability, and I was just wondering if there are some sustainability highlights that we can talk about. Is this LEED certified, or net zero or energy efficient or anything? Can you just talk a little bit about what's being done in the building for that?
Mark?
Yeah, I think where we were talking from the sustainability aspect was really about creating something sustainable within the urban environment, meaning how do we create density in a fashion that allows more people to live close to downtown, close to where they work, not need to jump in a car and drive everywhere. Some of the kind of hands-on quote unquote green components, the ideas behind the green roof, they're nice to look at, but they are also helping us with a lot of our stormwater management. In that case, we're starting to collect that and hold it versus just drop it quickly into the system. So I think that would be the main key driver related to kind of the green sustainable aspect. There's no real LEED component to things in this. From the development side, we're working hard to try to make these numbers and components work. To add that level to it as would be kind of cost punitive for us right now. But
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions of our registrants? Any other questions of our registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Alder Heck.
Thank you. This is probably for Lisa. Lisa, I noticed in the staff report a reference to, well, now I better actually bring it up so I don't misquote it. A reference to some motivations in the downtown plan. It's talking about recommendation 104. There's a paragraph on page 6. And at the end of that paragraph, it says, as an additional clarification, colleagues who work directly on this plan indicated that the original intent of this recommendation was to address specific development in the block bounded by North Hamilton, Butler, and Gorham Streets north of the subject site. And recommendation 4 is about allowing higher density development. And so can you just explain that a little bit? Was it talking about allowing higher density development in that other block to the north, or was it talking about preventing it in that block that's further to the north?
Yeah, so I did speak with Bill Fruehling about this as I was finalizing the report. And his recollection of when the plan was created is that block that is bounded by those streets, there at the time that the downtown plan was being written, there was redevelopment interest there, but there's also a structure on the block that interested parties wanted to preserve. So, there was the balance of building preservation versus development. And he indicated that language was meant to support like higher density in a new building to offset the preservation of the existing building on that block. So like if they're going to keep a building rather than demo it, that could have lowered the density and development potential of that site. I think that being said, like staff does want to acknowledge that the language in the downtown plan is not that clear. So clearly the recommendation plan in the James Madison Park neighborhood does not clearly associate that recommendation with this kind of redevelopment conversation that was happening. And the language sort of reflects what's written in recommendation 105 about development along certain streets as opposed to development bounded by these streets. So I think there does have to be some acknowledgement of that language there. I think additional language from the plan. Let's see.
There are certainly other things to talk about in the plan for sure.
Yeah. And I don't know if Heather has any additional thoughts on how that conversation went. Okay.
Just one more quick question. If we are going to approve those demolitions, can you assist with getting kind of the standard demolition condition that we've used in other redevelopments or demolitions, I guess? It's been floating around for quite a while. Maybe Heather has access to that. Those are my questions.
Yeah, we can try to put something together. This one to me sounded a little bit nuanced in that there was also encouragement to perhaps support a potential relocation with the estimated cost of demolition. And so I think we may come up with a unique one and not draw from a past report, but yeah, we can come up with a recommendation.
And only for the two houses furthest to the south is what I was anticipating. Thank you.
Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. For staff, I think I'm following up on Alder Heck's comment here when I ask, well, I think I heard you say that if we approve this, and there's an awful lot to like about this proposal, if we approve it, there's some concern of it being precedent setting for other blocks, and you would like some wording that delineated that it's for this specific location and not for the remainder of the James Madison portion. Is that correct? And if so, would you be willing to help us out with that wording? I'm not prepared to really do it, but I understand what I think is the intent there, and I would be glad to sponsor a resolution or make a motion to support that kind of language if you were able to provide it.
Sure. So I think that some of the things that the staff report mentions, and the applicant has mentioned it as well, is the existence of the parking garage across the street from a portion of the site. And that site is also within the James Madison Park planning area and was redeveloped into the sort of large structure, obviously not a house-like building. So that's one, I think, thing that has changed probably the character of North Butler Street and perhaps differentiates it from Franklin and these other streets. I think you can also talk about, the location of the property at the edge of the planning area. Does this somehow mean that it gets treated differently? I mean, I hate to, put the ideas out there, but I think if you look at the properties in relation to the planning area and James in the downtown plan, you can maybe see how the location of this could support a higher density. That's just what it's a staff report. I know in the staff report, we specifically talk about the garage. I think there's also a planned mixed use node recommended at the corner of North Butler and East Johnson Street that is going to result in a building that is of a different character than the house-like character that we see in other parts. Those are some things that come to mind.
Okay.
And I don't know if Heather has other things to recommend, but it really is basically, if it's a presidential decision to allow higher density on North Butler Street, why is North Butler Street going to be treated differently than some of these other streets in the neighborhood, potentially?
Heather, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think that was really great start, honestly. I think to keep it simple, it could be something like the Plan Commission acknowledges that this area is already different from other parts of the DR1 district where the prevalence of narrow buildings. Let's see. Now I'm kind of just thinking out loud. Lisa probably said it better, but since there are already other distinctions on this block, particularly the garage across the street, the Plan Commission finds that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, let me just say I'm in agreement with both those because of the parking structure and because it's at the edge of the district.
Excuse me, Commissioner Fernandez, we're into questions right now. We don't have a motion, so we are not into discussion yet. So did you have further questions?
No, only that I support that wording, but I don't know how to word it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Are there further questions of staff? Further questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands now, we are looking for a motion. So do we have someone who can make a motion on this proposal? Alder Heck.
Given that this site is in District 2, I'm going to make a motion. Which item are we making motions on at the current?
We would be making a motion first on agenda item 3, which is the demolition.
I'll move approval of the demolition permit for 117 to 125 North Butler, and with the added condition, as we discussed earlier, that a pause be put on the demolition so that the possibility of moving the two southernmost, that would be 123 and 125 Butler, would be advertised with any saved demolition cost going to the cost of a proposed move.
Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. Alder Heck, did you wish to speak to your motion?
I would, please. I do recognize that those two homes do contribute to the fabric of the James Madison Park neighborhood, as Landmarks Commission found. One of those two is in not the greatest of shape, and that is really the fault of the property owner or previous property owner. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for that, but I do think that that the demolitions do meet the standards.
Thank you, Alder. Any further? Heather.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. I just wanted to clarify and perhaps share screen on a draft condition to get in front of the commissioners, but especially clarify the addresses. It's our understanding as staff that it's 117 and 123 that would be, okay, Alder Heck's indicating yes. Would it be appropriate to share screen with a
yes,
draft
please
condition?
do.
Okay. Okay, and I can read it here, that the demolition of 117 North Butler Street and 123 North Butler Street not occur for at least 60 days following approval, so as to allow time for interested parties to consider possibilities for relocating one or more structures. Should relocation occur, the applicant is encouraged to contribute the estimated cost of demolition toward relocation expenses.
Does that work for you, Alder Heck? Yes, okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll come to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. The next motion would be on changing the zoning. Alder Heck.
I'll give this a try also. I move to approve the request to rezone the properties at 117 to 125 North Butler from DR1 to DR2, and can provide rationale in further discussion.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. Alder Heck, you wish to speak to your motion?
Please, as I think you've heard, this is really the crux of the matter, this particular agenda item. And honestly, I have struggled over many months about the resolution of this particular proposal, and I have been involved in a couple of the previous proposal versions well before I was even an alder as a neighborhood association representative. It really is kind of a judgment call. I think it's a policy call, as Lisa mentioned, that about whether or not this is appropriate. And honestly, a few years ago, I don't think I could have gotten to this place. But I've carefully read all aspects of the downtown plan, and it's really, I think, a combination of recommendation 104 and 105 in the James Madison Park District section of the downtown plan. And you've heard those, but I'm just going to read those real carefully. Recommendation 104 is allow relatively higher density development that conforms to the maximum building height maps along Hamilton, Butler, and Gorham. And that's what Lisa referenced. And, it does seem there's, there was discussion that wasn't really supposed to apply to all of Butler Street. It was really supposed to apply to this triangle that's closer to the lake, but that's not what the language says, so it's a little bit iffy. But recommendation 105 is really what I think provides the rationale. Allow infill and redevelopment along Hancock, Franklin, and Blair, generally compatible in scale and design with a predominantly house-like character. And it doesn't mention Butler Street. So I do think that the things that Lisa was mentioning about Butler being different are true. Not only is there a large city-owned parking garage across the street from this site, but the rest of that side of Butler Street can be redeveloped up to 8 stories. So directly across the street, the parking garage could be taller. That's debatable, but the 8 stories that would be directly across that part of Butler all the way to Johnson Street, I think also indicate that Butler is different and that this is a transitional zone. Now, that said, the reason I've struggled in the past is because I fear that the current house-like character of the rest of this block could be demolished in the future using this same rationale that, it's a transition block. And Lisa noted that there's a proposed development at the corner of East Johnson and Butler on this side of Butler that also could endanger a couple of homes if that were to move forward. So, I think it's a risk worth taking. It's not really too likely, I think, that these parcels will be assembled and torn down on this side of Butler. It's possible, certainly, but there aren't. The homes to the north would be the biggest potential target, I think. But I think it's a risk worth taking to support this particular project. But I think it's admirable that the two developers, Blake and Reese Fisher, live in the neighborhood and love the neighborhood. But it's really about precedent to me, and that's where I'm willing to take the risk on this.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Alder. Is there any further comments on this motion? Lisa?
I just wanted to just state for the record that based on Alder Heck's comments that that he's I guess recommending approval of the rezone and noting specifically that North Butler Street is a transitional zone within the James Madison Park neighborhood planning area, and referring to the maximum 8 stories proposed in the maximum of 8 stories on the west side of North Butler Street per the downtown plan.
And I'd add recommendation 105 indicates that Hancock, Franklin, and Blair remain different from. I don't know if that's necessary because it's not really pertinent to this particular agenda item. But
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. So I think that Alder Heck certainly explained my feelings very well. Is a part of this motion going to be language that says something like, in recognition of the fact that there is a 3-story building across the street, there's the possibility of 8 stories across the street, and this is a transitional zone. It is the intention of the Plan Commission that this not be considered precedent setting for the remainder of the neighborhood. Is something like that appropriate?
Heather or Lisa, would that be preferable to be part of the motion? Heather?
I think it sounds similar to what I heard in the rationale.
Yes.
That Alder Heck had. So yes, I think that is appropriate, and we would reflect a summary of that in the minutes.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing from staff, Commissioner Fernandez, is that has been covered by way of Alder Heck's articulation.
Thank you. What I'm really asking for is something to be carried forward so somebody doesn't have to pour through the minutes to determine what our intent was. So I was trying to summarize that, but if that's if this is adequate as far as everyone else is concerned regarding our intent, then it's fine with me.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, for raising that. Alder Paulson.
I'll have a couple more reasons that I think might also help on precedent. It's fine if the committee sort of all agrees with what Alder Heck has already articulated, and we don't need to go much beyond this. I'll just say that I also have seen versions of this project going back, I think, to 2007 or 2008. I chaired the steering committee that was working on turning the parking garage into an 8-story building, and worked on the steering committee down the block at Pincus McBride. Earlier versions of this project, I think, were problematic and couldn't have been done. There was one that was going to go through the block, and I don't think that would have been appropriate. But this one where it doesn't extend through the block and it's totally faced onto that, it helps, doesn't establish a precedent that's too radical for the block. So I think having everything still having the middle of the block be open is still helpful for respecting some precedents. I'll say that I don't think 125 and 123 are very good at preserving the rhythm. I think they've always felt out of rhythm. I'm actually personally very excited to see 123 go away, either through demolition or for moving. But I think things will actually be better without 123. I don't quite. It doesn't. The building doesn't go quite as far as I would have liked for really articulating, really being still within the rhythm, even though it's at a different scale, but still hitting the rhythm, even if it's like don't, but it's still respecting that rhythm. I wish it was just a little bit more on respecting the entryways and those front of the things. But I respect that there is something there that does do that, and so I do think it is still helping us to feel the same rhythm. Just feeling like it's a little bit. There's new little fronts to the building, so I think that also is in line with not totally destroying the precedents or not establishing a completely new radical new rationale for changing the plan. Good luck, staff, trying to come up with something sensible out of my rambling here. But I think that I can come to a couple of reasons beyond what Alder Heck has mentioned earlier for how this can support what's different here and how that can support getting to the new zoning district without totally upending everything that is already in the plan. So
thank you, Alder
thank
Paulson.
you for listening to my rambles.
Commissioner Shepherd.
Just a quick comment. I think staff did a good job in the report of highlighting, again, sort of standard 9, and noting that the Plan Commission may require an applicant to submit a plan to, once again, urban design for review. So that's another, I think, sort of tool that Commission can use to, again, look at development in this area. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there further comments before we come to a vote? Seeing no raised hands, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. We now need a motion on conditional use, agenda item 5. Alder Heck.
Thanks, bear with me. I'm doing too many things at once. I will move that we approve the conditional use application for 117-125 North Butler for a multifamily dwelling unit with greater than 8 units.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. Alder Heck, did you wish to speak to your motion?
I'll say only that it meets the standards of approval, which I could amend my motion to say, just to make sure.
Yeah, probably. Okay. Any discussion on this item? Seeing no raised hands, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, we need a motion then on agenda item 6, which is the certified survey map. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I will first say that I miss Commissioner Cantrell's motion-making abilities, but I will move to approve the certified survey map for the property owned at 117-125 North Butler.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Shepherd. Alder Heck, did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any comments? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. That brings us, since all the other items remaining were on the consent agenda, that brings us to business by members. Any business that any of the members want to bring up? Seeing no raised hands, secretaries. Oh, whoops. We do have one. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the Farmland Preservation Task Force is meeting for the first time on Wednesday. And nothing has happened yet, so nothing to report back, but it's at 3 p.m. on Zoom if people want to bop in and listen. And I will at some point have a more thorough review for the commission. I'll talk to Chair Zellers about how to bring any information back.
And does that show up on the city meetings listing so that people could?
Yes, it should. Planning staff is staffing it, bless their hearts. So we appreciate that, and it should be on the list, the weekly list of things. It is in Legistar, so.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, Alder Paulson, for bringing that up. Thank you. Anything else? No raised hands. We'll go to Secretary's report. Heather.
Thank you, Chair Zellers. Let's see, we have a little bit of a more lengthy Secretary's report than usual. First of all, reporting back on recent Common Council actions. I think all of the council decisions were consistent with the Plan Commission recommendations, and just wanted to note that 121 East Wilson Street and the Dane County Sustainability Campus both moved through on the consent agenda at the last council meeting. Looking forward to our next two meetings. In the month of November, the Plan Commission will see nearly 1,500 new housing units proposed. That must be a record for 1 month. I won't even look back to compare it, but I'm almost sure it is. On our meeting on November 7th, a long list of notable items we'll have on 219 North Fair Oaks. This is right beside, but not within the Voigt property. A new 4-story, 110 unit building at the corner of Cypress and Hughes on the south side. Proposal for the new Centro Hispano site on that property. Grand Canyon and Odana Road, a conversion of an existing hotel to a 153 unit apartment building. And then on Orchard, Randall, right near campus, demolition of a few buildings for construction of an 8-story, 46 unit apartment building. And then at the, let's see, the tail end of that list for the 7th, I'll also mention 6706 Odana Road, right within the Odana area plan area, a proposal for demolition of a couple of commercial buildings for a new 124 unit apartment building. Looking forward to November 21st. We will have the Lake Street ramp demolition before the Plan Commission, and that's for construction of a new 13-story building that contains a new parking structure and also an intercity bus terminal and nearly 250 apartment units tailored towards students. Also, the first major development within the Oscar Mayer Special Area Plan. They're at 2007 Roth Street. Conditional uses for a 250 unit and a 303 unit apartment building on that site. At Junction Road on the far west side, notable for the rezoning for a future bus rapid transit terminal and a park and ride on the western edge of the route. And then zooming back toward downtown, 310 to 322 East Washington Avenue. This will be the demolition of a church for construction of a 10-story mixed-use building with 130 apartment units. On State Street, 668 State Street, construction of a new 4-story addition containing an additional 24 units. Let's see, I think that will round it out for the 21st. So as you can see, some meaty items ahead for the month of November. Really looking forward to these discussions and want to just thank you all for your good work. Take care and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, that brings us to needing a motion to adjourn. Do we have a motion? Moved by Commissioner Solheim. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Spencer, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, motion passes unanimously. I will see you all on November 1st. Thank you.